Okay. It's our little movement break. Now I want to bring in one of our other co-dreamers, Liz Deligio, and her colleague, Bear River, who are going to tell us a little bit about what we can expect here in the Rooted Global Village this summer.
Hey, thanks, Oceana. Hey, Bear.
Thanks for having me. Hey, Liz.
You want to
Thanks for
get
having me today.
started? Yeah. Why don't we start with you? All right, go ahead.
Okay. I was prepared to sit back for a second. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and sticking around with us through the end of the day. My name is Bear River, and I'm really excited this summer to talk with you all about the stars and the planets. We'll mostly be focusing, so I guess back up a little bit. Some of you may have seen the session from April where we talked a little bit about connecting with the planets. And this summer, I was invited to kind of continue that conversation. And what Liz and I sort of co-developed over a couple of talks was this idea of combining florilegia, which Liz will talk about, with a little bit of night sky observing. So kind of on this theme of ecological belonging, I've been thinking a lot about the planets and the stars. My ancestry, or some of my ancestry, goes back to the interior of Alaska, and my Athabascan ancestors have it that when we pass, we become stars. And so when you see the stars, we're very literally looking at the bodies of our ancestors. But even if that way of understanding the stars isn't something that resonates with you or makes sense from your own cultural perspective or background, the planets and the stars are very much a part of this whole ecosystem that we inhabit. If we extend our definition of ecology beyond the atmosphere or the magnetosphere to include the whole solar system or even the whole universe potentially, then the planets and the stars are just as much our relatives as the trees and the rivers and the oceans. And so this summer, my invitation and my kind of portion of co-piloting the ship is to lead you all through observation of Venus. We're actually just at the time, it'll actually be tomorrow, that Venus will be at the highest altitude above the western horizon. So if you go outside after sunset and you look west and you look up, the brightest thing you see will be Venus. And I figured that's something that everyone globally can relate to. It's the same direction that we're going to look after sunset, the same planet that we'll all be observing. And because of apparent retrograde phenomena or apparent retrograde motion, we'll also be able to see Venus sort of appear to move backwards through the sky and descend to the horizon and then disappear into the underworld. And then in August, we can look to the eastern sky just before sunrise and we'll see Venus as a morning star. And this descent and ascension is something that we see going back, or we can relate as far back to the myth of the descent of Inanna, which is just one way of saying that if we look back to some of our oldest stories as people, one of the first stories that we have recorded, then we see this interest and this relationship and dialogue between our ancestors, our living human ancestors, and our celestial ancestors. I feel like that's a good place to turn it over to you, Liz.
Yeah, thank you. That was perfect. Yeah. So I think we want to weave together kind of three parts this summer. So the ecological belonging piece is the piece that Bear's talking about. We're going to be able to find Venus on the horizon, and we're going to use kind of old stories to help introduce us into a relationship. So something that Bear shared with me that I thought was just a really good clarification is that astronomy is a system of classification, right? It tells us the name of something and where it is in the sky. The astrologies, of which there are many, that's more of a system of relationships because you enter into it through story, right? And these are old stories, and we're going to go through them together. And we're going to kind of keep track of that process together as much as people feel called to through another old system. We're all going to be going back in time this summer. It's just called florilegia, which is just Latin for collecting flowers or collection of flowers. And the idea is you keep track in whatever way works for you. You can do this through photos on your phone. You can do this on paper with a journal. You can do it in your mind, however works for you, of the things that strike you. So as you journey with Venus each day, seeing her movement through the sky, just beginning to notice, you can think of it as synchronicities, things that call to you, things that draw you forward, and kind of putting those together. And so in that space together in June, July, and August, as Bear kind of leads us through Venus's journey, we're also going to have a space to kind of do art making together and to share and reflect on what's kind of emerging for us in the process. There'll be a time for kind of like music and reflection and art making and learning, and then this daily practice of finding Venus, or weekly, whatever works for you. There's no expectation other than the invitation to continue what we were doing together today, where with kind of each different speaker, we were allowed to consider all of the things that call to us that different forces in the world might minimize, make less real, put a rupture between us and them, but to enter into those relationships that are complicated and can hold, different, the environment that ecologies are suffering, right? So entering into this relationship is also about being able to bear witness to what's all around us, and that we'll do that together through the aid of kind of the mythic imagination of our elders who lived before us on Earth and the elders that we have in the sky. And if that doesn't make any sense, do not worry. This is a journey that we're doing together, and we're going to figure it out piece by piece. Okay.
Yeah. I think maybe the last thing that I'd like to share, and I'll talk more about this in June. I've been going through Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and there were a few things that popped out that felt like really important points to anchor. And it has to do with the difference between astronomy and astrologies, that naming and classification. So in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Freire says that, that each person needs to come in, that no matter, not even the best intentioned leadership can bestow independence as a gift, and that liberation, which is a human phenomena, cannot be achieved by semi-humans. And throughout the first chapter, he repeatedly says that the ontological vocation of a person is to become more fully human. And while we might want to pick that apart or talk about some of the things that are there, I think this idea of being fully human, to be fully embedded as a being in the ecology, requires a certain amount of subjectivity. And if we're contrasting subjectivity to objectification, which I think inherently happens when we look at celestial objects and we think of them as objects in the sky rather than as beings that we are in relationship with, we can flip that process. When we see the celestial bodies in the sky as bodies we're in relationship with, I think it helps us to see ourselves as bodies rather than objects, and that by entering into that subjectivity, that's where we're able to engage in liberatory and revolutionary struggle. And so I want to just say that now, so that folks who are maybe wondering, is this for me? Is this too woo? Is this maybe a bit more removed from my interest, can understand a little bit about what I hope to draw us all into. And if you've already read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, then you may already know that what Freire talks about is the importance of teachers to be co-intentionally participating in learning together with students. And so I think this Florilegia process is not just a really apropos way to engage relationship with Venus, a planet that is said to have to do with flowers and art, but it's also a way that we can all participate together and co-create this curriculum and this experience of directly engaging with relationship and dialogue with the sky, whether that's Venus or other planets, which we can talk about, or the stars themselves.
Yeah, and I can just say, having been working behind the scenes with Bear, his knowledge is immense. And so, to really be able to bring the questions that you have, and this isn't about needing to believe in astrology or to be an astronomer. We're kind of drawing, from those, but that's not a requirement for what we're going to be doing together. This is really to kind of open up the space for the relationship and to see what comes through. And one of the reasons why we chose kind of the florilegia and collaging in whatever format it takes is that it's been shown to be very healing for ruptures that involve fragmentation. And so when we think of ecological belonging and the ruptures and the interruptions that happen with that, we're hoping that that practice together is a way to draw closer together, to have a deeper sense of our own insight and intuitions, but also maybe to offer, some kind of healing about what does it mean when we work within ecological belonging and we're working also and living inside of a world and a universe that has so many ruptures, so that those pieces can come in there with us as well into that somatic experience.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions,
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer those, but we're also right on time for some Afro-rhizomatic dance. And folks can
Wow.
just
I was just thinking, I just love how you brought all this together, Liz and Bear, around exploring the ruptures and fragmentation that can happen when we're trying to come in contact with the more than human world. And so how would we come back to wholeness? That was actually one of the things that I wrote in our last exercise with Janice, how do you be whole and not parts? And yeah, thank you for that. Yes. Are there any other questions? I see someone's already convinced and they're signing up. Yay. All right. Well, thank you both. That was lovely. I was already convinced, but I'm so there now. Thank you.